going on, folks, and welcome to another episode of Seeing Live. I'm Colion Noir, and you may have heard about ShotSpotter technology in the news. It's one of the latest tools being used by law enforcement to fight crime. Check it out.
In the mid-2000s, San Francisco started with the ShotSpotter system, and since then, our gun violence is down basically 50%.
ShotSpotter has been particularly helpful in lowering crime rates, and specifically homicides. We're at an all-time low of homicides for the past 30 years.
ShotSpotter has helped us because we know that we have forensic evidence that we can rely upon in proving that a shooting did or did not take place. We're able to prove almost the specific location of the shots that were fired, as well as the quality of the shots, the sound of the shots, how many there were, and how far apart they were.
With ShotSpotter, I have more confidence sending the officers into the vicinity where the shots are fired.
Charlie 77, show me responding to that 916.
We respond a lot smarter, we respond faster. We know with better accuracy where the gunfire is located, so there's taking a lot of that guessing out of the game.
The president and CEO of ShotSpotters is Ralph Clark. He joins us now. How's it going, Ralph?
Doing very well.
Absolutely.
Good afternoon.
Yeah, that it is. At least in Dallas it is. So, what is ShotSpotter exactly for people who aren't too familiar with it?
Great. Well, ShotSpotter is an acoustic surveillance technology that uses sensors to be able to detect, locate, and alert on gunfire. And the way we do that is we deploy sensors in urban areas, typically 15 to 20 sensors per square mile. We put them up typically high on top of rooftop buildings and the like. And these sensors are designed to ignore ambient noise and trigger and timestamp on impulsive noises, essentially booms or bangs. And when it does that, we're able to use the time differential to triangulate the exact location of that particular gunfire event within 30 to 45 seconds of the trigger being pulled.
Okay. So now, besides, I guess you could say, besides the obvious, what was the motivating factor for developing technology like this?
Well, that's an interesting question. So the company was founded 20 years ago by a Dr. Bob Schoen, who had been doing some work at Stanford Research Institute, figuring out the epicenter of earthquakes, along with other things that kind of had it, kind of propagations of things. Mm-hmm. And Bob became very concerned about a gun violence problem that the city of Redwood City was experiencing, and thought that he could design a system of acoustic sensors that could detect and locate on gunfire. So he quit his job at Stanford Research Institute and basically put up a system to do that. And here we are 20 years later. We're deployed in about 90 cities. And the technology has evolved, obviously, over time. And the thing that we've come to learn probably better than anybody is the extent to which gun violence happens in many underserved communities, and the extent to which no one calls 911. And there's many more gunfire events than what results in homicides or GSW, gunshot wounds. And so we become basically a set of very precise ears to help law enforcement respond to those events safely and quickly.
Okay. So now, a thought came to my head when you were kind of explaining that. So does the system work in a way where once it detects a shot's fired, does it automatically alert HPD? I'm sorry, I'm from Houston. Does it automatically alert law enforcement in the area, or is it just kind of passive in a sense that, you know, once it's been called in or reported by someone else, they just go back to that technology and pull it?
Oh, great. Yeah, no. So it's much more active in that regard. Okay. So we're basically sending a digital alert to a officer or a PSAP center, a 911 call center in real time. And basically you can think of it as a screen pop if it's on a laptop or mobile device. It's a screen will come up, it'll have a map on it, it'll have a dot on a map, and it'll have a description of the event, the exact location in terms of lat and long, and address, number of rounds fired. We even have a recording snippet of the event, so an responding officer can actually listen to it as they're going self-dispatching to the scene. And we now have a mobile app as well, so we're able to send this directly to a mobile app. Because again, the thing is 80 to 90% of the time people don't call 911 when shots are fired. And even when they do, more often than not, people don't know exactly where to direct law enforcement. So effectively, you have a lot of gunfire activity that doesn't get responded to that effectively becomes normalized. And I think anecdotally, I would just share with you and your audience that we've come to know from working with policing agencies that this is not thousands or hundreds of people that are using guns criminally. These are very few people that are driving most of the gun crime problem. I live in Oakland, California, born and raised, and when you talk to the police department here, they estimate it's probably no more than 20 serial trigger pullers that are driving 60 to 70% of the gun crime here in Oakland.
I'm actually glad you said that because at least in a lot of the research and reading and just personal experience from what I've known, people tend to talk about the violence that tends to happen in the inner city holistically from the standpoint as, it's just one massive war zone. Engaged, and everyone in it is essentially engaging in this level of violence when it's the complete opposite. We're talking about a super minority of people in these environments that are actually engaging in these criminal activities and causing basically, yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's really quite interesting because there could be a lot of people that are involved in, I would say, illegal or criminal behavior. But even amongst those individuals, there's the shooter, right? There's that extra crazy person that has no compunction or reservations about being a shooter. And again, the idea that we try to promote in working with law enforcement is you're trying to identify and intercept that shooter before they kill someone, because the fact of the matter is when you do ultimately have a homicide, chances are that's not the first time that gun's been fired criminally. And it wouldn't be the last time unless you're stepping it. So this is really about focused deterrence and providing some level of normalcy to these communities that don't see a response. Because that's ultimately we need to denormalize gun violence, and you can only do that when police show up.
Yeah, no, it's definitely. As I was going through your website, I noticed just reading through the literature, and I know somebody pointed out about enforcing. Doing a much better job becoming exceptionally vigilant about enforcing the current laws that we have on the books now, and doing our best holistically to approach that. As most organizations, corporations, they tend to kind of stay away from the political components of things. However, with this technology, you guys kind of almost thrusted into the political sphere, or at least the gun debate in many respects. How do you guys typically manage that and handle that aspect of it? Because I think in a lot of ways, when we talk about the gun debate, there's this idea and notion that, you have gun rights advocates over here, then you have essentially what we call the anti-gunner, so to speak. And there's this idea that the people over here are largely apathetic to gun violence, when in reality, I think we're talking about different ways of going about trying to fix the issue. So how do you guys navigate that kind of lane in terms of dealing with what you guys provide as a product and in that political environment?
So we're right down the center. This technology and the application of this technology is completely apolitical and agnostic. And so we don't have to concern ourselves really as a company with the debate between the two extremes that you described. In fact, we like to think of ourselves as a bit of a unifying force because, who would be against responding to and intercepting serial trigger pullers? Yeah. I can't imagine anyone from the left is going to be concerned about that because there's a professed concern around gun violence, right, and reducing gun violence, preventing gun violence. And I would say even folks that are to the right of the argument, if you will, I would imagine feel the same way. And that's why I was really happy to come on your show and be able to talk directly to your constituents and make sure they understand exactly how this technology would be used. And I guess I would just say to a further point, it's kind of interesting. If you look at our company, we're a relatively small company, less than 100 employees. We think we pack a pretty big punch for our size. But if you look at the mix of employees, we have all manner of folks. So when you get down as a company, again, we're agnostic. When you get down to the individuals, we have just about every type of person that you would imagine. So there's definitely, people that have, card-carrying NRA members, if you will, and we have some card-carrying ACLU members, and there's even a few extra, different folks that probably belong to both organizations and are equally passionate about that. And so, at the end of the day, we're all kind of coming together to solve a really big problem that is being dealt with in too many of our communities, and that is how do you prevent and reduce gun violence? And I think the only way you can do that is you got to focus on where the problem is, and the problem is in the illegal use of guns, and we know that the illegal use of guns is being perpetrated by very, very few individuals. So let's go get at that And that's the first order of business. And then second and third order of business is something else. And we'll leave those, debates to other folks. But there's a lot that needs to be done with just attacking the problem where it exists right now.
No, absolutely. I fundamentally agree with you in that regard. And I think the diversity in terms of the makeup of the company in itself kind of speaks to the overall idea that we all tend to have a common goal and that we want to reduce gun violence wherever the illegal use of firearms, wherever it may happen.
Yes.
And so with that being said, too, just out of curiosity, how do you go about determining, or who determines where these sensors are placed? Or are you kind of targeting areas that are known and understood to have a high violent rate, or is it just kind of random? How does that work?
So we decide where to place the specific sensors, but we decide in cooperation with a police department and a city where they want to have protection or this surveillance technology deployed. And I mean, it's not, it's not super secret. You can go to almost any city and kind of know where there could be a potential issue with respect to gun violence. Again, we only see a little bit of the data because I think typically and sadly in most situations, people associate gun violence with, again, homicides and non-fatal shooting, GSWs. And, we know, sadly, that oftentimes these events are happening in our most challenged and underserved communities, which, by the way, are deserving of their fair share of public safety, because these communities otherwise are very quite resilient. And by and large, the vast, vast, vast majority of folks are just trying to get around, just doing their life, doing their business. And, what's disrupting that is, again, these very few serial trigger pullers. So we typically deploy in areas of, no less than 3 square miles. We're deployed in about 90 square miles of New York City. Okay. We're expanding our footprint fairly significantly in Chicago, Oakland, Milwaukee, Miami, places like Rocky Mount, North Carolina, Miami Gardens, places you probably haven't heard of, because the other thing that we know is that even in small cities, they can have a kind of 3 square mile problem, again, where these serial trigger pullers are running rampant. And I'll just make another point. I've been with the company now for about 7 years. Uh-huh. And one of the things that was most heart-wrenching to me early on when I joined the company is going on a ride-along in an urban city. And because I like to ride around with cops and kind of get a sense for, where we're looking to potentially deploy. And there happened to be a shooting that day. And this officer that I was with was called to the scene. So he asked me, hey, would you mind, if I go to the scene of this homicide, to help control the area? And to me, this was really quite, thrilling, scary, exciting, all at the same time.
Yeah, I can
not ever witnessed that. Yeah. So we get to the scene, and sure enough, there was a young man, sadly, because we need to be real here and talk about, at least from the homicide point of view, who this is affecting, and it's oftentimes affecting young men of color. And here's a young kid laying in the street. And that was upsetting to me. But what was much more upsetting to me, and I don't even know that I can describe it adequately, is watching like the people around the scene, many of them very young children, going about their business in a way that it was just completely normal, with almost a vacant look. I mean, literally, kids riding their bikes, jumping rope. No one was upset. They knew the kid is like, hey, well, this is what's supposed to happen here. And I started thinking about that. And I says, well, if people ever really measured that kind of impact of gun violence, our hair would be completely on fire. Because unfortunately, when we isolate the gun violence problem to homicides, it's easy to have a cognitive disconnect because it affects young men of color. And no one's wishing anyone to be shot and killed, but I think it's the kind of thing, well, gee, what were they doing? Were they a part of a gang, et cetera? But there is no looking away from a 8-year-old little girl that, for all manner of reasons, she might be bedwetting, she might be exposed to teenage pregnancy, drug abuse, alcohol abuse, the whole 9 yards, because they've had this level of stress and trauma introduced to them at a very, very young age on a cumulative basis. That's the cost of gun violence. And so that's why I'm compelled and honored to be working with this company to try to do something about it.
Awesome. Yeah, and I love the work that you guys are doing because, like I said before, I think it's universal in our understanding that no one wants the continuation of the level of gun violence that some of these communities are dealing with. And then on top of that, I want to ask you one quick question before we go.
Yeah.
Do you think you guys have been haven't got enough credit in essentially helping or aiding with the kind of lower levels of gun violence that we've been seeing as of recent?
Well, no, I mean, so we're really proud of this technology. We've got 33 issued patents. We're impactful. We know a lot about gun violence that most people don't know, but we're also humble to know that this is a tricky business.
Yeah.
I mean, we can't take singular credit for any.
Clearly.
We don't want singular blame for anything either.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm successful is there's a city or agency that's taken a comprehensive approach to gun violence. And we're one of the tools, not the only tool, but we're one of the tools that a police department and city uses to kind of get at the problem. But I will say this, that probably the biggest lever to reduce or denormalize gun violence, honestly, is an engaged collaborative community working cooperatively with law enforcement. This is not anything you can arrest your way out of. This is not anything that you can just go flood a urban community with a whole bunch of police officers if, in fact, there's not a trusting, collaborative relationship between that police department and that community that they're there to serve, actually. So one of the ways we like to talk about our tool to police departments, and it's challenging in some places, is like they should use this tool as a way to better serve communities, right? Yeah. Show up, be present, the way they would in the affluent part of town if a gunshot's fired. So what I always like to say is there's a part of Oakland I grew up in, and now there's a part of Oakland that I'm fortunate enough to live in now. And I got to tell you, if a gun's fired where I live now, there's no question about police showing up. Where I grew up, hey, I mean, well, now with our tool, they're kind of showing up the same way. But before our tool, totally. Hey, does someone show up? And so, people and agencies that take that view, I think that's where we're going to be successful. And we're happy to be part of the team. We don't want singular credit at all.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, thank you very much for taking the time to speak with us today. It was an absolute pleasure. It was actually a very invigorating conversation for me. And I wish you guys the best of luck.
Thank you very much. Honored to meet you. And thank you so much for having me on your show.
Absolutely. Anytime.
All right. Take care. Bye-bye.
We're going to take a quick break. And when we come back, how does being limited to one gun a month sound? Yeah, I don't like that either. We'll be back.